Welcome to FBC this morning. We're continuing in our study of the Gospel by Luke. If you're new to us today, we try to go through the Bible, and we're partway through one of the longer Gospels that we've been given from among the four Gospels. Let's start with a question. Who was the first missionary Jesus ever sent? And if you're thinking it must be one of the apostles, no, it wasn't one of those. They actually won't be sent out until the beginning of the next chapter, in chapter 9. Or you might think it could have been one of those 72 guys that get sent out at the beginning of chapter 10, so they haven't been sent out yet either. Or you could think of, maybe as somebody that was, spent their whole life studying the Old Testament, and they would be a good one to send out. But no, that would not be it either. That would be wrong. In fact, you could cross off your list everybody you would ever think of as good missionary material. Because the answer is a lunatic, demon-possessed dude, a Gentile, ignorant of Scripture, a madman turned into a missionary. Jesus didn't find him in a seminary. He found him in a cemetery. And so let's read about that. We don't have anything on the screen here for some reason, and I can't necessarily read that screen back there, in case you guys thought I could now that I have my new. It's up here, okay, right? All right, I just can't see this. All right. If you can fix it, fine. If you can't, I will be, I'll struggle a little bit. I'll be distracted. If you don't mind that, then no big deal. All right. Then they sailed. I'm going to start reading. Is it up there? Yeah, okay. Then they sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. When Jesus had stepped out on land, there met him a man from the city who had demons. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he had not lived in a house, but among the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him and said with a loud voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many a time it had seized him. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the desert. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. And they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss. Now a large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him to let them enter these. So he gave them permission. And then the demons came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and drowned. What a story. When the herdsmen saw what had happened, they fled and told it to the city and in the country. Then the people went out to see what had happened. And they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it told them how the demon-possessed man had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. The man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home, declare how much God has done for you." And he went away, proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. All right, this was not that's on now. This was not a man who had a lot of experience with what we call the spirit-filled life, unless you mean an evil spirit. And that he's probably the Bible's greatest example of what it's like when a spirit is allowed to run a life. In this case, ruin a life. The story is found in the 8th chapter of Luke here. It's also in Matthew 8 and in Mark 5, where we get more details to fill out this story. We discovered that Jesus not only has a shocking sense of humor, he is obviously full of mercy. Because what we're going to learn from this scripture is that what turned a madman into a missionary was great mercy. So let's reel back to last week. Last week we had the big storm. Some of you were here for that. A great miracle when Jesus commanded the waves and the winds to, like wild animals, to be muzzled. And now Jesus and all the disciples have crossed safe to the other side of the lake. It's early morning, and let's get a map up here so you can see the east side of the lake, where there's a loose confederation of Roman towns and communities called the Decapolis. Decapolis just means 10 towns. And we're not sure exactly which one they ended up at, but they're on the east side of the Lake of Galilee, and the boat arrives near a town on Galilee's eastern shore. Along these cliffs, these shores are steep cliffs that cut quickly down to the water. To this day, there are limestone caves there with graves that are notched in. It was a predominantly Gentile area, so a herd of pigs would not be unusual, where Gentiles are doing the eating, and maybe especially Roman soldiers who were very fond of bacon. I only say that because I know all soldiers love bacon. So anyway, and if you're the exception, tell me afterwards. For our purposes, we could call this a region of tombs and pigs, which were both unclean according to the law of Moses. See where I'm going to go with this in a minute. Living among tombs would automatically make a Jewish person unclean, because any contact with the dead would leave you unclean for 7 days. Then you'd have to be purified. And then, of course, pigs. Jews and pigs were not in speaking terms. This, of course, was before they were invented Pig Latin, so you can't really talk to them until then. But anyway. But you have this area, and so we have unclean Gentiles, a man with an unclean spirit living among unclean tombs, surrounded by people raising unclean animals to feed unclean soldiers. And what in the world is a Jewish king, in fact, any Jewish person actually doing here? It's actually astounding. And what sticks out from that and many other things that we'll see here is this idea of mercy. It's a story of powerful mercy for a hopeless, very homeless guy. He's a guy lost in a pitiful existence where it appears nothing has turned out right for him. In fact, he could use a turn of fortunes more than any person you probably have ever heard of. Even you and I could use a lot of mercy. Couldn't you? Sometimes we call it good luck. It's like when you show up at class unprepared the very day that the professor leaves the quizzes home. Said, oh, great, thank you very much. Or the weak ground ball bounces off the pitcher, but he gets to it, but then he slips and he does the splits as he throws off target to first, and you end up on third base. And you say, wow, this is my day. Or the policeman is looking the other way when you inadvertently go through a red light. Or you get a big rebate on some item that you were going to buy anyway. You lose a race by an eyebrow, but then the guy that got first is disqualified by a drug test. This is when your day is really working out. Or this one, the baby's diaper is not poopy the minute my wife pulls out of the driveway for a change, so to speak. For a change, so to speak, or a non-change. And that's practically the definition of mercy. Or is it? Actually, these are not really stories of mercy at all, because there's nothing in them about some bad thing that should have happened to you, that you deserve, that is deliberately withheld, overlooked, or forgiven. So like when the cop is looking the other way, that's not mercy. That's a fortunate coincidence. Maybe the mercy of God on you there, but in his case, mercy would be when he saw exactly what you did, and then he decides not to pull you over or pursue you, because that's what mercy involves. Someone knowing you deserve punishment and withholding it in a deliberate act of kindness, if not like compassion. Mercy is not getting some bad thing you deserve as an intentional expression of compassion. Originally, I wrote that down as an act of compassion, but it really is a non-act. It's a withholding of something. Now, the story in front of us shows the power of Jesus over Satan. That's a big part of Luke's message throughout the gospel. Recognize who Jesus is by the amazing things that he can do. But that's not this story's only message. Luke wants us to read this so that we learn the heart of Jesus, the compassion of his heart. It's not just his muscles, but his mercy. In verse 39, Jesus tells the delivered man to go home and declare how much God has done for you. And in Mark, we find out what he actually meant by that, where it adds this, how he had mercy on you. And so that is a phrase we want to remember here, even though it's over in Mark. This is in a way, the summary of this whole story. So here's this troubled, pretty hideous man, completely broken down by the enemy. No doubt his family had given up on him long ago. He had a putrid pile of reasons for needing help. But he had absolutely no right to expect anything from the Holy Son of God, who came all the way across the lake in a furious storm to confront him, unless it is to judge him and send him to hell. and that would be deserved justice, but instead, this story is about to become a beautiful picture of mercy. So let's get into it. We're going to start with Luke chapter 8, verse 26. So we've read all of these already. Then they sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. So there's the area of Galilee on this side of the lake, and over here is the area that we call Decapolis. Now, I wonder if you see any connections between what we studied last week about the storm and this new episode that we have in call it the Bay of Pigs. Well, one thing we learned from the miracle of the calm storm is that Jesus is in control of nature, right? And so Jesus has just spoken peace to, let's call it an outer storm. But a wilder and more insidious storm is blowing fiercely and uncontrolled in the heart of a man on the other shore. There's like an evil wind within him. The words spirit and wind are the same in both Greek and Hebrew. There's a wind in his heart that has torn him free from all restraints. It's like it's blown off his mast and left him oarless in a tempest where he's hopeless. So then you enter Jesus. And he can speak powerfully into nature, and I guess here what you would call supernature, what's supernatural. Nobody was strong enough to tame this man who was spinning out of control in some kind of hellish hurricane, except for one person named Jesus. And so Jesus comes to him. Now here's another important connection between this storm on the lake and what we have here. The disciples in the storm had asked a question right at the end. It was unanswered. They said, what kind of man is this where even the wind and the waters obey him? Who is this man? And here on the eastern shore, the demons of all beings give the precise answer to that unanswered question. And they speak out and they say, you're Jesus, none other than the Son of the Most High God. The demons know exactly who he is. Now, if you're interested, sometimes when demons would try to speak out and identify Jesus, Jesus would say, be quiet. Here, he did not do that. And we're not sure why. And then a third thing. The disciples had asked Jesus, remember when they woke him up when he was sleeping in the back of the boat, don't you care that we're perishing? That's how Mark phrased it. And now these same disciples, I guess, should be wondering why. This is sort of a guess, but they travel through a traumatic storm and get to the other side. For what? For what? For this pathetic, nightmarish creature that crawls out of a graveyard to confront Jesus, shrieking. And so here they are on the other side. We find out that this is, in fact, the only ministry that Jesus does on the other side of the lake. After this encounter, Jesus gets back in the boat. They go right back to Capernaum where a crowd is waiting on the dock, if they had docks, or at least on the beach. Jesus came for this one thing, this one infested wreck of a man in a region that doesn't want Jesus there anyway. They could ask Jesus, Master, should our caring for people go so far? You risked us in that storm in order to save that? And the question is so similar to the one that they asked him, do you care that we are perishing? And does he care that this one man is perishing? And we could stop and return that question to them and say, well, how many needy people would it take for you to feel like it was worth it? What's the calculus of your caring? Because the measure of our master's caring is the lowest possible number, 1. It's the same as all his men will hear in chapter 15, where Jesus drops those 3 memorable parables, boom, 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 about the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. 1 out of 100, 1 out of 10, 1 out of 2. The Lord's scandalous calculus of mercy is spelled out there, but it is lived out here. They came for one lost man. And the disciples have to digest the fact that when the master said, let's go to the other side, what he meant was, let's go to the other side for this one man. So here's the first thing about mercy that I want you to think about. Mercy means going to painful, maybe even ridiculously risky lengths to touch a hopeless case. And they're all hopeless. John Holt said, mercy is giving when you feel like keeping, praying for others when you're the one who needs the prayer, feeding others when your own soul is hungry, living truth before people even when you can't see results, hurting with other people even when your own hurt can't be spoken, being faithful when your flesh wants to run away. Well, this was a time when a disciple might want to run away. a ragged, raging lunatic comes at them. That's pretty intimidating. So I want you to look at him. We're going to go to verse 27. When Jesus had stepped out on land, there met him a man from the city who had demons. Mark says that he ran out of the tombs to confront Jesus. For a long time, he had worn no clothes. He had not lived in a house, but among the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and he fell down before him and he said in a loud voice, now demons, when they speak out of somebody, they will use their vocal cords, but often the voice will even sound different. If you've been in a situation where this happened, it's a little creepy. Anyway, so they said, I will not try to imitate because demons spoke in different ways, but they said with a loud voice, what have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me. And the me is the demons, it's not the man. Then go down to verse 29. For many a time that is the demon, had seized him. We find out later that there are many of them, but usually they have a spokesman, so that's what you would have here. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles and like a rabid dog, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the desert. And desert, translated desert here, but it just means an isolated place, a place where other people didn't live. Mark adds that the man was relegated to the graveyard because no one was strong enough to tame him. Night and day, Mark says, among the tombs and across the hills, he would always scream out and slash himself with stones. So here's the setting. They pull up to the beach. The madman spots them, runs down there, intends to attack Jesus. It appears that the demon powers are intent on trying to keep Jesus from that area. The possessed man with superhuman strength hurls himself at Jesus, and yet instead of falling on Jesus and doing harm to our Lord, he falls before him to his knees, ends up bowing down and pleading with Jesus. Almost looks like worship. Well, not quite yet. So who is this supposed new worshiper? Well, is he a guy in a nice suit, carrying a Bible and using all his best Sunday manners? No, he's naked, he's got wild, filthy hair, he has bloody wrists, he's a scary sight. He's got something wrong with him, and a demon has been messing with him, a lot of them. Now, an unclean spirit, you guys probably know this, but that's the same as a demon. They're usually invisible, but they can take visible forms, pretty much like any angel. Demons are fallen angels who are determined to oppose God in every way, destroy anything God cares about. They hate God and anyone that has anything to do with him, including you. The condition of this man shows exactly what demons would love to do to somebody, anybody, when given the chance. What that man has become might be the best picture we have of a soul in hell. Let me say that again. What that man has become might be the best picture we have of a soul in hell. And if you are saved at all, you've been saved from this. The demons dehumanize this guy. They turn him into an animal so that nothing of the image of God can peek through anymore. It's been cast into the tombs because no one can control a beast like this. There are no safe houses in Palestine for guys like this, like asylums. No one has a place for him except Jesus. And here's something you should think about right now. Put yourself in the scene wherever you can. What if you had been one of those disciples and this madman comes rushing down to the boat yelling? Wouldn't you kind of put one foot back in the boat just in case you need to make a swift getaway? I mean, I think I would, but not Jesus. Jesus does not. So I would like to offer a second thing about mercy. Mercy is loving people that others only fear. Mercy means choosing a path that moves toward somebody that you might before have run away from. And in fact, you dare not take this path towards someone unless you are also possessed by a spirit, which would be the Holy Spirit, spirit of a rich and bold and fierce love. But if you're honest and you think about this, would you have taken this path toward this guy? How would you have viewed him? I guess that's what I'm asking. How would you see him? Is it possible that you could have seen him as some mother's little boy gone crazy? A little son who had once skipped down the trail, but has somehow landed in a hole so deep he cannot get out. Mercy has different eyes of compassion. So when I read what Jesus does here, I realize I have to admit, I have a pathetic shortage of real mercy. This is something Jesus is trying to teach the disciples and us. Now, next we look closely at the screaming encounter. So let's backtrack a little bit here and read this. When he saw Jesus, Mark says that the man spotted Jesus a long way off. He cried out, screaming at the top of his lungs, falls down before him, said with a loud voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? It's not time yet for there to be judgment on me." As we'll find out in Matthew, it's before the time. I'll give you the exact quote a little bit later. But it's like, why now? Why you and us? We don't want anything to do with you. And it's not the man that knows who Jesus is. Jesus is a total stranger to him. But it's the demons that know Jesus. We'll talk about that. For Jesus had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of him. Now down to verse 30. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" So, "You know my name, what's your name?" And he said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. And we're not sure why that was. Remember, Mary Magdalene had 7 spirits, and here it says legion. There were many of them. Why they glommed onto each other and possessed one person, I have no idea. But anyway, they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss. The abyss meaning the pit, where disobedient spirits are kept awaiting final judgment. And Mark adds at this point also the demons begged Jesus over and over not to banish them from the region. Well, what do we learn from this? Well, the biggest thing is, who is Jesus? There's no confusion about who Jesus is here. Now, religious leaders might debate that. Crowds would be divided on this. The disciples would be a little dense. But according to the forces of evil, his identity can't be denied. They know exactly who he is. Now, when they say legion, let's talk about that for a minute. That was the largest troop unit in the Roman army, about 6,000 soldiers. So you could say, well, the grip of the demons on this man resembles the grip of the Roman army on Palestine. We know that there would have been at least one demon per pig. Mark tells us 2,000 swine. So we know it's a big number. Whether it's all the way up to 6,000, we don't know. But even though it looks like the demons have a clear numerical advantage, up to 6,000 demons, think of an orc army opposite the one Jesus. Imagine that. That's an amazing scene to think about. And what do? They cower in fear. They beg for their lives. They plead with Jesus over and over not to be banished from the region, not to be sent to the abyss. They have no defense. They have heard this voice before, back when they were evicted from heaven. They know that they have to do what he tells them. And just think of their experience with Jesus before they fell with Satan. They had seen his power. They had seen his glory. They had seen the sheer beauty of the Son of God. And yet they're alienated from him. But they must remember. They have to remember. And they do. These demons, and they know more than what they knew then, because they know to call him Jesus. They're alienated from him, but they know their doom is sure. In Matthew, they talk about not wanting to be tormented, and here's the quote, before the time. So they know what God has in store for them at the end of history when they find themselves plunged into the lake of fire, which was created primarily as the final place of punishment for the devil and his angels. I was going to say the final resting place, but I'm sure it's a non-resting place. And just as they plunge with the pigs into the lake of Galilee, they will one day sink to their ultimate torment in the lake of fire, and they know it. Now, one thing you should know for certain, it's this great Jesus, the one who is the Son of the Most High, who is fighting your battle when you face demonic interference in your life. It is no contest. One little word shall fail him, wrote Martin Luther in the great anthem to God's power over the devil. A mighty fortress is our God. And here are the words to the 3rd verse. And though this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God has willed his truth to triumph through us. The prince of darkness grim, we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure, for lo, his doom is sure. One little word shall fell him. I love that last line. One little word shall fell him. We have the disciples of Jesus listening to this whole conversation, maybe with their mouths hanging open. But, they might think about that question that they had just asked on the boat. Who then is this, that even the winds and the waters, and now even the wild demons obey him? Now, they had seen exorcisms before, but not like this one. So here's another important thing that we must know about mercy. that mercy does not despise, negate, bypass judgment and punishment. There's so many armchair theologians like to think that God would be nice to everyone because he's pure love. He would never judge anybody, so everyone is okay. And that is sentimental, but doesn't have one little part of truth when it comes to reading your Bible. Now, I can't talk about mercy without explaining this. It's not clearly referenced even in this paragraph, but just think about this. Jesus, the Lord of all mercy, he will judge these demons in their time. And see, the fact is that mercy has no meaning where judgment is not possible. It's like the policeman who saw you going through the red light. He decides not to pursue you, but let's say to get the whole picture of what mercy is in the Bible, mercy has to contain, or godly mercy, that cop then ticketing himself and paying the fine. Because someone needs to pay for this. When he's going to give you this beautiful gift of grace and of mercy, justice must still be served. Let me give you an actual circumstance that actually happened. This is Fiorello LaGuardia. You probably landed in his airport before if you've gone to New York. So one winter's night in 1935, by the way, he was the 99th mayor of New York City. He was still the mayor when I was conceived in his city in 1946, although I didn't know it at the time. But anyway, one night, 1935, he showed up at night court in the poorest ward of the city and dismissed the judge for the evening, and he took over the bench. And that night, a tattered old woman was brought in, charged with stealing a loaf of bread. She defended herself by saying, "My daughter's husband has deserted her. She is sick, and her children are starving." And by the way, this was in the depths of the Great Depression. The shopkeeper refused to drop the charges. He said, it's a bad neighborhood, Your Honor, and she's got to be punished to teach other people a lesson. LaGuardia sighed. He turned to the old woman. He said, "I've got to punish you. The law makes no exceptions, so $10 or 10 days in jail." Well, $10 at the time is, I looked this up yesterday, it was $228 today. Well, even while pronouncing sentence, LaGuardia was reaching into his pocket and took out a $10 bill, and he threw it into a hat with these words, "Here's the $10 fine, which I now remit. And furthermore, I'm going to fine everyone in the courtroom 50 cents for living in a town where a person has to steal bread so that her grandchildren can eat. Mr. Bailiff, collect the fines and give them to the defendant." So the following day, a New York newspaper reported $47.50 was turned over to a bewildered old grandmother who had stolen a loaf of bread to feed her starving grandchildren. By the way, that would be over $1,000 today. Making forced donations, this is the newspaper article, making forced donations were a red-faced storekeeper, 70 petty criminals, and a few New York policemen. Well, for mercy to be extended, justice must still be served. And for us to get mercy from God to save us, justice had to be served on Jesus at the cross. This is the gospel. That's where he suffered our judgment, our punishment. And only then could mercy then be released in all of its glory toward us, undeserving people, served to us with full freeing power. Now, what we get next in our story is the pig prayer. The pigs aren't praying, but someone's praying for the pigs, I guess. A large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. Remember, this is a Gentile area where, pork was eaten and pigs had to be raised if they were going to eat them. And they, that is the demons, begged him to let them enter these. Now, this is really weird. I mean, you ask the question, why on earth did they beg to go into the pigs? Did they need a host body to survive? I used to think that, but again, probably not from what we know about demonology. Did the demons, for some reason, just like pigs really well? Unclean animal, of course, would appeal to them. Yeah, maybe that. Or did they just have a lust to torment something, even a lower creature, if they had to stoop to it? Or are they just reaching for anything? They're in simple desperation. They don't want to go to the abysses. Oh, what about the pigs? Or maybe they had more forethought on this. Did they have in mind to destroy the herd and therefore stir up animosity against Jesus so that he wouldn't be able to do ministry in that area? So they would drive the pigs mad on purpose and then direct them to stampede over the cliff. Or maybe it was a tricky way to escape, I don't know. Or was this Jesus doing a tricky way to get rid of them, herding pigs over the cliff? You know, he could herd fish. We've seen that already. Well, I guess the most important thing would be, what did Jesus have in mind here, if we could kind of guess it that way? And I would have predicted, I mean, if I hadn't read this, I would think Jesus would say, forget it. You may not remember, he's talking to the demons, you may not remember this, but you are disgusting demons. You may not pray. You have no basis to ask me for anything. Just forget it. But look at what Jesus decides. This is really a pretty odd thing. What actually happened? From this, we're going to learn a fourth thing about mercy. So he says he gave them permission. In Matthew, it says that he spoke one word, go. The demons came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and drowned. Now, my shallow dive into porcine aquatics revealed that some pigs actually can swim. So the mention of the steep embankment likely explains why they all drowned. They just couldn't get out of the water. There's no beach. Now, what happened to the demons once the pigs are dead is anybody's guess. Because I don't think demons need a body in order to roam the planet under the command of the prince of this world, their boss. And then this is actually the only place in the Bible where demons possess an animal, which I just didn't realize that. I mean, I apologize to our cat Lucifer when I was in second grade. You get this, you can imagine the story, but I don't know, I think dogs actually are more likely to be possessed. It would be cats that are the possessors. Anyway, sorry for all you cat lovers. Now but the main thing is, it just takes one word to free this man from up to 6,000 brutal invaders who have brought him under the thumb of Satan. But it takes just one twitch of the holy finger of God to deliver the man. God strikes a one-word blow because it's easy for him. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. 1 John 4:4. Now, is Jesus being gracious to the demons to answer their request with what looks like a reprieve, however short-lived? We can only guess why Jesus would answer yes to their prayer. In fact, it brings up a bigger question. Why, when they first fell, when Satan fell and all these demons went with him, why didn't he judge them with final judgment right then? Why in the world did God release the devil and his hordes to inhabit this planet that we live in all this time, awaiting some judgment way down the line? And we don't know the answer to that either. But I don't think there was any kind of mercy here on these sniveling demons who had cruelly stripped this man of everything that could remind anyone of God's image, reducing his life to near zero, robbing him of every shred of human dignity. It's most likely intended as a mercy to the demoniac, to show him in dramatic fashion that he has himself been freed indeed. That cliff dive is visual evidence, like the Israelites watching Pharaoh's army drowned in the Red Sea. Remember at the Exodus. Well, we should probably stop and comment on the loss of property for the pig owners. We shouldn't think that Jesus would be careless about that, destroying property, taking that lightly. It's best here to accent the word permission in verse 32. He gave the demons permission to do what the demons had begged to be allowed to do, which was leave the man and enter the pigs. The consequent loss of a large herd was, of course, an enormous hit on the farmers' wallets, but it was the demons, not Jesus, who destroyed the pigs. They didn't say, can we go into the pigs and drive them over the cliff, and these people will lose all of their pigs. They didn't ask for that, but they did that. But even though that absolves Jesus of some sort of crime, I guess, it opens the window to an important insight. I think this is so good. And I like what James Edwards says about this. He says, in the eyes of Jesus, the rescue and restoration of one person is more important than vast capital assets. Compared to the redemption of a human being, the loss of the swine herds, considerable though it is, does not rate mentioning. It fits with what Jesus said in Matthew 12:12, of how much more value is a man than a sheep, and certainly more than a whole ton of pigs. All for this one man. And so here's a fourth lesson about mercy. Mercy generates value in the recipient, even the most unworthy. Confers value on them, even on me, even on you. Now, we may not like maybe a turn of events that looks like Jesus is accommodating demons somehow. I mean, God does stuff for his own reasons he doesn't always tell us. One thing I'm thinking about, though, so why would he answer their prayer? But then I thought, am I all that sure that God granting my requests is not just as surprising as scandalous as Jesus making allowance for demons? It's all mercy. Now, if you think that the actions of Jesus and the demons are bizarre, check out what the townspeople do now. They see Jesus not as a blessing, but as an expensive and unwanted intrusion. This is the lunacy of unbelief. So here's the town's prayer. And here again, Jesus grants their request, even though it seems opposite to what you expect him to do. Verse 34, when the herdsmen saw what had happened, they fled and they told it in the city and the country. And for sure, they wanted the pigs' owners to know it wasn't their fault. And then the people went out to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. What a picture of a stilled storm. A saved man sitting at peace at the feet of Jesus, freed and forgiven, the open doorway to peace and joy and love and all the things that he had not had. And then it says the people that saw it all, they were afraid. And those who had seen it told them how the demon-possessed man had been healed. Then Mark adds, and even about the pigs. And then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. So the town has hiked out to the cliffs, see what happened, and they're afraid. They're not afraid of the demons anymore. They're afraid of the deliverer. Just like the disciples, remember when they had seen how Jesus so easily calmed the storm, they were frightened more of Jesus than they were of the storm. Both stories end in fear. Well, here's God in the midst of these people. The demons got that right. And these ungrateful, spiritually blind people want him gone because he's going to upset their whole way of life, which actually is true. But what does Jesus do? He leaves as they request, because there's one more thing we need to learn about mercy. The town had done a strange thing by making the amazing Jesus leave them, or asking him to. And now Jesus does a strange thing. Jesus appears to do what they asked, but he leaves behind a secret weapon. Do you remember that? Remember that movie? He says, release the secret weapon. Well, here it is. Verse 37b. So he got into the boat and returned, that he's heading back to Capernaum. The man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, return to your home, your people, Mark says, and declare how much God has done for you. And then Mark adds, and how he had mercy on you. And he went away proclaiming, he, that is the man who's now been restored, he went away proclaiming, preaching throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. So let me put it this way. Mercy finds another way to reach closed hearts. Mercy looks for a way to get to someone. Even when they think they have gotten rid of God, you folks can banish me, but you will not actually be rid of me, because I'm going to leave you a secret weapon. He leaves a standing monument to his power and his mercy. He leaves them the sanest man in town. So you look at the drastic and beautiful transformation of this man who it could not have been more lost and wretched. The liberated demoniac, though, sits there sane in front of Jesus, and it scares people. I mean, it's a miracle. That's scary in itself. But the guy asked to go with Jesus, and Jesus, I suppose it would be the first person that has treated him with any tenderness for a very long time, if ever. I love what Virginia Stem Owens writes about this deal. Can he stay or can he go with Jesus? What's going on? She writes, as Jesus is climbing back in the boat, the now sane Gerasene begs to come with him. Understand that Jesus has provided no theological analysis of the event, has not even explained his own identity to the man, unless he's doing that while they're sitting there, which could be. The Gerasene only knows that this stranger has freed him from the living hell that imprisoned him. He has neither been instructed in the Torah, nor agreed to circumcision, nor sworn off bacon. So far, he's only progressed to the stage of dressing himself. But he knows that Jesus is responsible for his new freedom. It makes sense that he would want to stay near his deliverer, and the only one he is certain can keep his demons at bay. Why should the man want to stay in Gerasa anyway? People there won't soon get over their fear of his violent history. They'll continue to watch him with suspicion and dread. His estranged family may or may not want him back again. He'll spend the rest of his life living down his past in the village. Why not leave and start over again with the man who has released him from torment? But Jesus turns him down. No, he says, you can't come with me. The question is why? Why? Well, I want to say that the no of Jesus is the yes to a surprisingly blessed life. I would call it a plum assignment for one who has been the recipient of so much torment and now has received so much abundant mercy. It's the amazing assignment to be a teller of the truth, to tell the truth about you. It's not true he had no training, he has no teaching, but he has an amazing testimony. Max Lucado says it like this: all he knew was that Jesus could scare the hell out of hell, and apparently that was enough. Jesus assigns him the mission of just going around, starting in his old neighborhood, telling others how merciful God was to him, and maybe they'll believe that God could even reach down and deliver them. He is planting seeds, and Mark tells us he goes around the whole district telling his story. Who would not want to hear it? For the gospel comes to them later. He is planting the seeds that will mean many people joining the kingdom of Christ. Now, sometimes God seems to not answer our prayers because he really has an open door for something more special. Ken Geyer puts it like this: life for this man changed when a storm blew Jesus his way. On that tattered shore, Jesus reached into the most terrifying of tombs to pull a naked prisoner from the darkness, to set him free, to dress him in his right mind, and to send him home so that little lost boy could skip in the streets once more and tell the whole world the great things the Lord had done for him. So by sending this man back to his people, Jesus is giving a wonderful gift to the very people who asked him to get lost, the people who tried to exorcise Jesus from their midst. That is all mercy. So here's the demoniac going back home, singing an amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. All right. I don't want us to miss the big idea here. And there are many ways you could preach this passage, but here we're going to say it like this: a major qualification of any missionary is a large estimate of how much mercy has been given to him. In other words, if you don't realize how much God has done for you, how merciful God had to be to reach down to you, then you're probably not going to bother to share the good news with other people. Once you do realize that missions is practically spontaneous. It's automatic. It's like the leper in chapter 5. Jesus told him, don't tell anybody, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't stop himself from going around all over spreading the news. And you may have many other great qualities to be a missionary. Maybe a biblical education, lots of local experience, a sturdy pair of Doc Martens. But if you don't have the sense that when God saved you, he did something massively merciful for a wretched soul, then you lack the most important qualification. Lacking this, you cannot be sent. A witness is first and foremost a stunned and grateful worshiper. Do you see how this might be a clue why we don't witness more often than we do? So I'm going to close with that, just thinking about that. I think that's why this bizarre tombs and pigs story is so important for us. We're just where we're sitting here on a Sunday morning, because real people are perishing in our communities. Real people in our families, real people in our workplaces. And we claim to believe that they need Jesus just as much as this demonized man and his whole town. We all do. But I'm not impressed with how well we, and I include myself, we blood-bought Christians are doing reaching to our perishing neighbors. And I'm just thinking of my own ungodly complacency. And all week I've been thinking about my neighbors that I have not talked to. I just wonder if we could come up with a good excuse why we don't care that they're perishing. And we don't have a good one because there isn't one. Now listen carefully. The degree of our caring is strongly tied in with our sense of how much mercy we personally have received. in the last 70 or so years, I don't know how long, a great swath of the Christian church has been soft-selling lostness. And so they have minimized guilt and depravity in the message to non-Christians. They quote John 3:16, but they seldom really go into much depth trying to describe that word perish. Because if you quote the verse, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish. And perish means to be destroyed in hell forever and ever because of our personal damnable sinning. And the sad result of the soft sell is that many of us who were evangelized that way never got an adequate personal grasp of this mammoth mountain of mercy that it took for God to save us. And we never heard how incredibly bad we were, how undeserving, how depraved. And I think it's a lot like what Jesus said to Simon Simon the Pharisee is in his house. He said, the one who is forgiven much loves much. That's what relates to that. Forgiveness comes from mercy. Now, if you think it wasn't that hard for God to welcome you in, then I think your love for him will be anemic, but it's also why we don't think the lost people in our communities are in such deep trouble. Perishing, lost, on the brink of being destroyed. So just think of your neighbor in hell. I think the main solution for this pathetic lack of caring is to go back to the beginning of our life with God, and learn about mercy and grace. Take a deep dive into how desperately sinful you were and how amazing the painful grace of Jesus was when he died for you on the cross. This is what it takes to turn you and me into a missionary, even in our own hometown. Think of the cross. Someone had to pay for your great sins. His name is Jesus. Think of yourself as being that person as desperate and ruined as that poor battered man who came screaming at the beach. Jesus poured mercy on your wounds from the blood of his own. He said to you, punish yourself no more. I'll take those sharp stones and I'll let them cut me from the ends of a Roman scourge. Cut yourself no more. Take my robe, sit down in your right mind, but for that I must hang disgraced and naked. The devil will snarl at me, and the crowds will despise me, and they will shut me up in a tomb and think they're safe from me. But you go from here and live. Be restored to your people and tell. Yeah, it's my turn for this. I'll be in shackles as the outcast. I'll go to the tomb and wrestle with death and with uncleanness till the devil cries uncle. But you go free. I'll see you when it's over, when it is finished. And just one thing. Could you just tell a few people what I did for you? Tell them about the one who crossed over to you at great peril, costing him his life. For you, a wretched sinner, only to now release you to spread the news of the incredibly merciful things I have done for you. Jesus made a missionary in a cemetery. He can make one out of you. Let's pray. Lord, I just want to pray for, I don't know, I'd call it obedience, Lord. I pray that we'll obey you. But I pray that it just comes out of our hearts that we are so amazingly blessed by grace and mercy that we cannot help talk about it. Teach us to love people that are still lost. Teach us to be bold. Teach us to have wisdom in how we do it. Teach us how to be gentle and respectful in how we do it. But teach us how to be clear that truth is truth and people need to hear it. May we love people as you do, to care for those who perish. I ask this in Jesus' name.